Jai, good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Samapriya is much better after her battle with COVID. She still has the fatigue, but is feeling much better as far as headaches and all those other things are concerned. Thank you for all your prayers and good wishes. So for the last 6 weeks, we've been studying the chapter 25, The Glories of Devotional Service. Lord Kapila Dev explaining to his mother Devahuti how this method of devotional service, this practice of devotional service, this endeavor of acting in devotion to the Supreme Lord is the most intimate, practical, and efficacious method of linking with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, with the absolute truth. There are various ways, because he's unlimited, because the absolute truth is unlimited. We all know that famous verse, Vedanti tat tat vavidas tatvam yad jnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti sabdyate. That the absolute truth can be realized in different phases, it's all one non-dual substance, but there are different features to it. And this method of acting in devotional service, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Bhakti Mam Abhijanati, I'm known only by devotional service. And we're learning from Lord Kapila Dev, spiced with Lord Chaitanya's teachings, that as individual spirit jiva souls, we have a very intimate, loving relationship with the Lord inherent in our very being. And this method of devotional service awakens that and brings it to the forefront. After explaining these things, it's kind of like a doctor. Lord Kapila Dev now will go into many details of how and why we became conditioned by material nature. It's a very expansive, detailed science. So we'll get right into it and start from the beginning of his teachings in chapter 26 is the fundamentals of material nature. And 27 will be understanding material nature. So we're headed now kind of into a new flow from Lord Kapila Dev in his teachings. Let me bring up the texts and we'll go through them. This is February 2023, lessons 2 and 3, which begin with chapter 26, the fundamental principles of material nature, text 1. The personality of Godhead Kapila continued, My dear mother, now I shall describe unto you the different categories of the absolute truth, knowing which any person can be released from the influence of the modes of material nature. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, one can understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the absolute truth, only through devotional service. Bhakti Mam Abhijanati. As stated in the Bhagavatam, the object of devotional service is Mam, Krishna. And as explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, to understand Krishna means to understand Krishna in his personal form, with his internal energy, his external energy, his expansions, and his incarnations. There are many diverse departments of knowledge in understanding Krishna. Sankhya philosophy is especially meant for persons who are conditioned by this material world. It is generally understood by the Parampara system, or disciplic succession, to be the science of devotional service. Preliminary studies of devotional service have already been explained. Now, the analytical study of devotional service will be explained by the Lord, who says that by such an analytical study, one becomes freed from the modes of material nature. Samapriya is going to start, and Madhurya Leela is a backup in case she becomes too fatigued. Swami, you can take over.
Okay, thank you. Hare Krishna, everyone. It's nice to be with everyone again. These are very profound subject matters. And what I have just gone through the last couple of weeks makes them more and more important to me, and I'm sure all of us. Very serious subject matter. So let's start today with Manvantara. Would you like to read? Unmute yourself.
Text 2. Knowledge is the ultimate perfection of self-realization. I shall explain that knowledge unto you, by which the knots of attachment to the material world are cut. Purport. It is said that by proper understanding of the pure self, or by self-realization, one can be freed from material attachment. Knowledge leads one to attain the ultimate perfection of life and to see oneself as he is. The Shvetashvatara Upanishad, chapter 3, text 8, also confirms this. Tameva vidadvati mritamiti. Simply by understanding one's spiritual position, or by seeing oneself as he is, one can be freed from material entanglement. As Kapila Deva explains to his mother, this seeing can be done by hearing from the proper authoritative source. Kapila Deva is the greatest authority because he is the personality of Godhead. And if someone accepts whatever he explains as it is, without interpretation, then he can see himself. Lord Chaitanya explained to Sanatana Goswami the real constitutional position of the individual. He said directly that each and every individual soul is eternally a servitor of Krishna. Jivera Surupa Haya Krishnera Nityadasa. Every individual soul is eternally a servitor when one is fixed in the understanding that he is part and parcel of the Supreme Soul and that his eternal position is to serve in association with the Supreme Lord. He becomes self-realized. This position, rightly understanding oneself, cuts the knot of material attraction. Hridaya Granti Bedanam. Due to false ego, or false identification of oneself with the body and the material world, one is entrapped by Maya. But as soon as one understands that he is qualitatively the same substance as the Supreme Lord, because he belongs to the same category of spirit soul, and that his perpetual situation is to serve, one attains Atma Darshana and Hridaya Granti Bedanam, self-realization.
Wow. Very serious subject matter. So seeing is hearing. How do you understand that, Manvantara? Seeing is actually hearing.
Seeing is hearing. Knowledge.
Without interpretation.
Right. Knowledge comes from the heart. The heart. I'm sorry?
Knowledge comes from whose heart?
Doesn't the guru instruct through the heart? You know, through the ears, which affects the heart.
Right, that's it. Through the ears. We are instructed by Prabhupada's words. We are hearing Prabhupada's words. He is the self-realized spiritual master. So if we're going to have a realization in our hearts, it has to be confirmed by what we hear from Prabhupada or from our spiritual master, right? So seeing is, hearing is how we get real knowledge. And it depends. And unconditional hearing means we found the right person to hear from, right? Okay. So serving in relationship with the Supreme Lord. Well, let's say I just want to serve, I'm inclined to serve and I just choose a different master. Then what happens? We start serving someone who's unqualified. That's also, what do you think? Is that advisable? Manvantara. I can't hear you, sweetie. Okay.
I agree.
It's not advisable
Oh.
to serve someone without understanding their worth and qualification,
Okay.
right? Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you, sweetie.
Thank you.
Sham Govinda, would you like to continue? And of course,
Before we go on, Sam,
oh, go on. Yeah.
there's an important principle that Lord Kapila is introducing here. In one of the previous lectures, remember we studied for the last week listening to, especially to Srila Prabhupada's lecture on each verse, and he was describing the acuto bedanam, the bhayam, the fear of birth and death. And he described how the rabbit deals with problems of fear by putting its head in or the ostrich. The rabbit closes its eyes, thinking that will make the enemy disappear and not be present anymore. Or the ostrich sticks its head in the sand and hides, thinking it's hiding from the inevitable enemy which is approaching it. So in the same way here, Lord Kapila Dev is explaining that the knowledge you're going to receive cuts the knots of attachment to the material world. Most people, honestly, don't want to hear what's coming. They would rather not hear it, just like the rabbit. Just shut my eyes and think it's not coming. But that won't last. It won't buy you satisfaction. It won't buy you relief or protection. So the pinching and the inconveniences of material nature are actually necessary, and at one point can actually be desirable to simply being covered over by the material nature and thinking we're enjoying. So as we study this and it gets heavy in upcoming lessons and topics, please don't shy away and simply shut your eyes thinking it's not pertinent or that you don't want to hear it right now. Haribol.
Wow, this is not light subject matter. Sometimes Krishna gives us things all at once, so to force the realization that this material body is not who we are. I just wanted to tell everyone real quick, in the middle of all this COVID, and I got a call yesterday that my aunt, who is my mother's twin sister and was 100, just left her body. So that was like the end of the line. Here I am, just me in the world. You could take it in a very liberating, wonderful way. Krishna gives us the instruction. So it's up to us if we want to take it. It's a little grave, but we're going to wind up in the grave or somewhere, that we don't really want to be. All right. This is called taking the philosophy to the internal level and understanding everything in relation to what we're hearing now. So, Sham Govinda, could you please read? Thank you.
Bhagavatam 3:26-3. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the Supreme Soul, and he has no beginning. He is transcendental to the material modes of nature and beyond the existence of this material world. He is perceivable everywhere because he is self-effulgent, and by his self-effulgent luster, the entire creation is maintained. Purport. Spirit is perceivable everywhere. Brahman means great. His greatness is perceived everywhere. And what is that greatness? Consciousness. We have personal experience of consciousness, for it is spread all over the body. In every hair follicle of our body, we can feel consciousness. This is individual consciousness. Similarly, there is superconsciousness. The example can be given of a small light and the sunlight. The sunlight is perceived everywhere, even within the room or in the sky, but the small light is experienced within a specific limit. Similarly, our consciousness is perceived within the limit of our particular body. but the superconsciousness, or the existence of God, is perceived everywhere. He is present everywhere by his energy. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is described here. He is not a temporary person, nor does he have a beginning. He is without a cause, and he is the cause of all causes. Para means transcendental, beyond the creative energy. The Lord is the creator of the creative energy. He is living in Goloka, but still he is present all over the creation. He is the super soul of everything, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he has innumerable transcendental qualities. It is also concluded that although he is undoubtedly a person, he is not a Purusha of this material world. Mayavadi philosophers cannot understand that beyond this material world, there can be a person. Therefore, they are impersonalists. But it is explained very nicely here that the personality of Godhead is beyond material existence.
Thank you, Sham. So that's a very important purport. What do you think it actually says?
Could you put the text back up kindly?
Text, yeah.
Thank you.
Supreme. Okay, so the Supreme is a person. Prabhupada's stressing. Okay, so then where is this person? Like an ordinary person, like one of us?
No.
Okay, go on.
Well, Srila Prabhupada gives the example of the embodied soul being conscious of the particular happenings within their body, just as you're explaining, Mother Samapriya, about having COVID, and outside of that, someone just died. But in other words, like, so much is, there's a difference between the jiva and the super soul as a macronism and a micronism. They're at opposite ends of the scale, but in one sense they're the same, and that they have a certain amount of, they're a person and they have a certain amount of free will or choice. Krishna having the most, the jiva having the minutest amount.
Right. It gives me a lot of faith to think about the all-pervasiveness of the Lord and how we can recognize, if you put it back to the verse itself, he's everywhere. He's all pervasive. So if someone says, where is he? He's right there. He's right there. And you don't have to go very far to meet up with him. How do we meet up with the Lord, Sham? How can we actually access that Lord who is everywhere? Very, very simple.
I just the 9 processes of devotional service.
Okay.
Yeah. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Snan, Seva.
Good for you. That's exactly it. And so if we want to be in contact with Krishna, there's a lot of different ways we can do it. And there's a lot of variety in the way we will do it. Right. And that's because you're an individual. Very good. Thank you, Sham.
Before we go on, Sama, just
yes.
want to point out the thread that Lord Kapila Dev did in the previous verse. He says, I'm going to give you that knowledge by which the attachment to the material world are cut. The knots of material attachment will be cut by understanding this knowledge. What's the first thing he describes? That beyond the material world, there's this, and within it is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's saying he's transcendental to the material modes and beyond the existence of this material world. He's establishing a point. Now I want to go to the next reader, who's going to describe that as his pastime, he enters into the material world. So there's a thread that that's being woven. Don't want to lose track of that as we go on.
Okay. And okay. Ian, would you like to read the slide?
Okay.
Great.
Okay. Put on my specs. Okay. 326.4. As his pastime, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the greatest of the great, accepted the subtle material energy, which is invested with three material modes of nature and which is related with Vishnu. Purport. In this verse, the word Guna Mayim is very significant. Daivim means the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Guna Mayim means invested with the three modes of material nature. When the material energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead appears, this Guna Mayim energy acts as a manifestation of the energies of the three modes. It acts as a covering. Energy emanated from the Supreme Personality of Godhead manifests in two ways: as an emanation from the Supreme Lord and as a covering of the Lord's face. In Bhagavad Gita, it is said that because the whole world is illusioned by the three modes of material nature, the common conditioned soul being covered by such energy cannot see the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The example of all of a sudden there may appear a big cloud in the sky. This cloud is perceived in two ways. To the sun, the cloud is a creation of its energy, but to the ordinary common man in the conditioned state, it is a covering to the eyes because of the cloud. The sun cannot be seen. It is not that the sun is actually covered by the cloud, only the vision of the ordinary being is covered. Similarly, although Maya cannot cover the Supreme Lord who is beyond Maya, material energy covers the ordinary living entities.
Wonderful.
Wow.
So we see that there's it's distinguished between the Lord and the living entity. Can you talk about that a little? How this is is the cloud actually covering the sun, or is it covering, what is it covering? And how does that relate to this?
Okay, so in the example of the sun and the cloud, the sun actually the cause of the cloud. So ordinarily we see, okay, we don't see the sun, so we say, you know, the sun is covered by the cloud, but actually the sun is just, the cloud is really just in front of the sun, where the sun is always there.
In other words, our vision is being covered by the cloud,
Right.
not the sun. The sun can't be covered by a little old cloud.
Yeah, so the cloud, right. So it just,
Okay.
yeah, and they're saying also that, for example, the material nature, we're not able to see the Lord or his face because, you know, the covering, by being covered by material nature, we're not able to see the Lord or his face.
Who wants to see the Lord in this group? I think we all want to see the Lord. So
Yes.
that's how we can see the Lord if we don't see the covering of Maya. Oh, this is so we got it now. We don't have to see, if we just have to push the Maya aside and see, oh, this is Krishna acting. Krishna is acting. That means pastime. It means that this is Krishna's pastime to act to help uncover us. But is it our pastime? That's what I wanted to ask Ian or anyone else. If it's Krishna's pastime, is this our pastime too? That I'm in the material world, just like Lord Indra, he had a pastime of being a pig. Is it my pastime that I'm in the material world and suffering? Chaita?
Hari Bol, I was thinking, good morning, everybody. I was thinking that it is our pastime because we have free will. We chose to come here. And so we're undergoing lots of misery and
Did
suffering.
we choose to come here or were we forced? Were you forced into the pig's body or did you choose it?
I think by making a choice to turn away from Krishna, then what follows is force.
Because there was a nice purport that in previous chapters describing that it's not the pastime of the living entity in the same way that it's the pastime of the Lord. Okay, we're getting into semantics about whose pastime it is, but the Lord is never forced to enter this material energy and take a form. We were definitely forced into this body. The conditioned soul is forced into abominable circumstances. And to call that a transcendental Leela, as because I'm Brahman and I chose to come here, is a complete illusion. What you're saying is that because we turned away from Krishna, that was a wrong act. It wasn't a pastime, it was a criminal act, and therefore you're forced into prison. So the prisoner's thinking, oh, I'm having my pastimes in prison because I chose to be here. That's simply an illusion to satisfy his circumstance, when in actuality he is forced by the state. in
I see.
prison.
So you're saying, Prabhu, that a pastime means it's voluntary.
Yes,
It's
So you're not-
transcendental
Good.
also.
good.
Okay, so
Yes,
it's not voluntary for us.
no,
Thank you.
right. Yeah, remember, do you remember that pastime? That example of the hog? It's in an
Of Lord Indra, yes, it's a
Yeah,
wonderful.
right. Yeah,
It's wonderful how
exactly.
he gets so caught up in it. He
And
really
covered over.
thinks he's in
thinking-
heaven.
Yeah,
So,
good.
so another point is, what is the reason for our so-called pastime? Why are we suffering in this world? Due to our what? Begins with a K.
Oh,
Yes, teacher got it. Due to our karma. You know, it's due to our karma because we have this body. Now, there's nothing that I can do. I have this body, therefore I have to suffer the reaction of this body. I can't change the body in the midstream. There it is. But I can change and become Krishna conscious. I can engage, like Shyam Govinda said before, I can see Krishna everywhere by engaging in devotional service. See, this is, Nandaji. Nandaji. Nice to see you.
Haribo, Nanda,
Very well.
welcome
So
back.
even though I swore I wasn't going to sit and participate, I was just going to listen. Still, it's so stimulating. So what,
Haribo.
We need you.
well, what you just said has brought up a question. What Sama just said has brought up a question that's been in my mind. So you said we're suffering here because it's our karma. So my question, and you can tell me if this is a diversion and you don't have to answer it now or discuss it, but here's my question. Sometimes I feel like it's my karma, due to my past activities and this and that. And so I have my body and my brain and my level of intelligence due to my past activities. And I don't have the karma to understand Krishna. So what do you have to say about that?
Oh, oh.
Don't faint, but just answer the question.
Then we'd all be lost. We'd all be lost.
But don't
all be
you
like-
know, I feel
Okay.
limited. I feel limited in my ability to understand Krishna. So what do you have to say to
All
that?
right, I think that's true too. We are limited in our ability to understand Krishna, but that is transcendence, right? That has nothing to do with karma, because the person with the worst karma in solitary confinement, eating worms, he could think of Krishna. Even in that horrible situation, he could be with Krishna. That's transcendence. That's the spiritual energy. The spiritual energy cuts right through all of this stuff.
This was
We're all
spoken,
in a
this was
vulnerable
spoken of by,
situation.
this was also spoken of by Kapila Dev in the first verse. I believe he said that any person can be released. Hold it. I shall describe to you the different categories of the absolute truth, knowing which any person. Srila Prabhupada was one that really imbibed this understanding. A lot of people prior to Prabhupada coming west wouldn't believe that a non-Brahmin or that a Sudra or even a meat eater could ever understand this knowledge. That was the general thought. But here, any person can be released from the influence of the modes of material nature by understanding this. Sama, we're getting pretty caught up
Okay,
in
okay,
topics
good.
here, just so
Okay,
that you
I'm
know
sorry.
we're falling pretty far behind.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay.
I'm sorry. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
No, thank you all.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Nanda. Thank you. All right. Okay, now let us move on to Premananda. Would you like to read Premanandaji?
Yes, Mataji, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Srimad Bhagavatam 3:26-5. Divided into varieties by her threefold modes, material nature creates the forms of the living entities. And the living entities, seeing this, are illusioned by the knowledge covering feature of the illusory energy Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Why this material world was created for the sufferings of the conditioned souls is a very intricate question. And there is a hint in the previous verse in the word Lilaya, which means for the pastimes of the Lord. The Lord wants to rectify the enjoying temperament of the conditioned souls. It is stated in Bhagavad Gita that no one is the enjoyer, but the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This material energy is therefore created for anyone who pretends to enjoy. An example can be cited here that there is no necessity for the government's creation of a separate police department. But because it is a fact that some of the citizens will not accept the state laws, a department to deal with criminals is necessary. There is no necessity, but at the same time, there is a necessity. Similarly, there was no necessity to create this material world for the sufferings of the conditioned souls. But at the same time, there are certain living entities known as Nitya Baddha who are eternally conditioned. We say that they have been conditioned from time immemorial because no one can trace out when the living entity, the part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, became rebellious against the supremacy of the Lord.
Unmute, Sama.
Finish the purport, Premananda.
He did finish it.
I did, yeah.
No, there's the next page. There's
Oh.
the next page.
Okay. In this material world, there are 8.4 million species of life. As spirit souls, they are all transcendental to this material world. Why then do they exhibit themselves in different stages of life? The answer is given here. They are under the spell of the three modes of material nature. Because they were created by the material energy, their bodies are made of the material elements. Covered by the material body, their spiritual identity is lost. And therefore the word mumuhe is used here, indicating that they have forgotten their own spiritual identity. This forgetfulness of spiritual identity is present in the jivas, or souls who are conditioned, being subject to be covered by the energy of material nature. Jnana guhaya is another word used. Guha means covering. Because the knowledge of the minute conditioned souls is covered, and they are exhibited in so many species of life. It is said in the Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st canto, 7th chapter, the living entities are illusioned by the material energy. Because they are forgetful of their spiritual identities, they think the material bodies to be themselves. To the conditioned soul, me means the material body. This is called moha, or bewilderment.
Okay, so just before we go on, and I ask Premananda just a quick summary of this very important purport. Nanda, this seems to cover a lot of the thing that we discussed before. Do you see that? That I don't know. I'm satisfied with this with this explanation. Nandaji?
I need to digest it a little more. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Just one quick analogy with that idea of karma. As a plant, as a seed matures, it is growing. When it first starts to germinate, it's under the ground, can't even see it. Somebody might even think nothing's happening. Then as it works its way through the ground, still no one thinks anything's happening. Then all of a sudden a little sprout comes up and it pops its sprouting leaves above the ground and then starts to grow according to its own individuality. But we can't, it's like it has its own sojourn, but we can't say that it's not mature because of its karma, except to the point that it didn't mature yet. It's on the path, it's on the way. The Lord is directing that. And that's an analogy that kind of shows that no matter where we are in our sojourn, it will eternally be such that we're always growing and learning more and becoming more and more enlightened and more in love with Krishna.
Well, that's a very positive way to look at it.
Yes.
But there might be, there might be some other things standing in the way that actually the living entity wants to enjoy this world, which would be a big setback.
Yes.
So Prabhu, this is applicable for devotees, where you are saying that we are growing, but for non-devotees who are still enjoying the material world, how can you say that? Can we say that they are also growing or getting enlightened? Or they are two parts.
Until the time that they, just like that verse that Lord Chaitanya spoke to Rupa Goswami, Brahmanda Brahmate Kon, Bhagyavan Jeev, a fortunate living entity, comes in contact with a devotee of the Lord. Prior to that event, then yes, it's like a seed on a shelf. Its actual self isn't growing. It may take on different bodies and go through so many different experiences, but until it comes in contact with a devotee of the Lord, it's shrama evahi kevalam. It's pretty much just useless behavior of the cycle of birth and death. But once one comes in contact with a devotee, neha brikamanashosti patyavayo nevidyate swapamapyasa dharmasya trayate mahatobayat, there's no loss or diminution. And that germination of this actual self begins, and from that point on, it's a steady progress back to Godhead.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu.
Right. Yeah. Very good. Chita, you want to say something?
Hari Bol, there was a beautiful question by Premananda and a wonderful, concise analogy that was given by Dhruva. Thank you so much. Hari Bol.
Okay, thank you. Very good. Okay, here is an interesting slide. Gopa Patni, would you like to read this for us?
Okay.
26:6.
Yes. I just got some new glasses, so I'm trying to do the bifocal thing here. Because of his, well, I'm gonna move you over. Because of his forgetfulness, the transcendental living entity accepts the influence of material energy as the field of activities, and thus situated, he wrongly applies the activities to himself. Purport, but I'm having a problem moving you around. Anyway, the forgetful living entity can be compared to a man who is under the influence of disease and has become mad, or to a man haunted by ghosts who acts without control and yet thinks himself to be in control. Under the influence of material nature, the conditioned soul becomes absorbed in material consciousness. In this consciousness, whatever is done under the influence of the material energy is accepted by the conditioned soul as self-actuated. Actually, the soul in his pure state of existence should be in Krishna consciousness. When a person is not acting in Krishna consciousness, he is understood to be acting in material consciousness. Consciousness cannot be killed, for the symptom of the living entity is consciousness. The material consciousness simply has to be purified. One becomes liberated by accepting Krishna, or the Supreme Lord, as master, and by changing the mode of consciousness from material consciousness to Krishna consciousness.
Oh, how wonderful. So read that last, wait, put it back, Betsy. Read that last little sentence again, Gopa. This is really far out. The material consciousness simply has to be purified. Read after that.
The material consciousness simply has to be purified. One becomes liberated by accepting Krishna, or the Supreme Lord, as master, and by changing the mode of consciousness from material consciousness to Krishna consciousness.
Seems so easy, doesn't it?
Yeah, Srila Prabhupada says in a second, we can do it.
Wonderful. Thank you. That sounds wonderful. And here's the, why don't you read that slide, the puppeteer, you know, that wonderful verse of Bhagavad Gita.
That's interesting. Where did you find that picture? Let's see. The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the three modes of material nature. Dun, dun, dun.
Hare Krishna. Okay, thank you, Gopa.
Right.
Amazing. There it is. Okay, let's go on with Tisha. Tisha, are you able to read, my darling Tisha?
Yes, thank you, Mataji. Good to
Okay.
see you.
Hare Krishna, good to see you.
Okay, 26 verse 7. Material consciousness is the cause of one's conditional life, in which conditions are enforced upon the living entity by the material energy. Although the spirit soul does not do anything and is transcendental to such activities, he is thus affected by conditional life. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. In conditional life, the living entity actually remains as if a captive in the hands of material energy. Whatever the material energy dictates, the conditioned soul does. He has no responsibility. He is simply the witness of the action, but he is forced to act in that way due to his offense in his eternal relationship with Krishna. Lord Krishna therefore says in Bhagavad Gita that Maya, his material energy, is so forceful that it is insurmountable. But if a living entity simply understands that his constitutional position is to serve Krishna, and he tries to act on that principle, then however conditioned he may be, the influence of Maya immediately vanishes. This is clearly stated in Bhagavad Gita, 7th chapter. Krishna takes charge of anyone who surrenders to him. In helplessness, and thus the influence of Maya or conditional life is removed. I've just felt so helpless lately, so.
And that's a perfect situation to depend completely on Krishna.
Yeah.
Our helplessness. Yeah, actually, we're all pretty much helpless.
Yes.
Everything that you're going through, we have to somehow or another see it as a blessing, because all of us here, we're not like regular people. We didn't fit into the regular world anyway, and what we're going for is like, divinity. So Krishna has to strip all these layers, and we're so attached. We're attached to our body. We're attached to the bodies of the people we love. We're, and then we're attached to our family, and then we're attached to our extended family. It's endless. It's endless. And Krishna starts to cut. The spiritual master starts to cut. So good that it's emotional, and that you're feeling helpless, and you have only Krishna to depend on. And it doesn't seem fair sometimes, things that are happening in our dream. You just have to have faith. That's what faith is. We have to have faith that we don't have to understand. We just have to see Krishna's hand work in this whole thing. That's why association is so important. Give each other some hope. Thank you, sweetie. So Tisha's speaking with realization, which is actually what we want. All right, Chaita, would you like to read the next slide? Here we go with all the choices. That's a little confusing.
Hare
Go
Krishna,
on.
Dhanava Pranams. Okay. Srimad Bhagavatam 3:26-8. The cause of the conditioned soul's material body and senses, and the senses presiding deities, the demigods, is the material nature. This is understood by learned men. The feelings of happiness and distress of the soul, who is transcendental by nature, are caused by the spirit soul himself. Report. Here it is clearly stated that the conditioned soul is forced to take a certain type of body and senses under the three modes of material nature. The body is not received according to his own choice. In other words, a conditioned soul has no free choice. Wow. He has to accept a certain type of body according to his karma. There it is. This is not a pastime. This is something we have to go through. But when there are bodily reactions as felt in happiness and distress, it is to be understood that the cause is the spirit soul himself. If he so desires, the spirit soul can change this conditional life of dualities by choosing to serve Krishna. The living entity is the cause of his own suffering, but he can also be the cause of his eternal happiness. When he wants to engage in Krishna consciousness, a suitable body is offered to him by the internal potency, the spiritual energy of the Lord. And when he wants to satisfy his senses, a material body is offered. Thus, it is his free choice to accept a spiritual body or a material body. But once the body is accepted, he has to enjoy or suffer the consequences.
Okay. Okay, that last line is real important, right? Since once we get the body, we have to accept it.
We have to run with it. I can't remember what purport it was, but I just read that this body that we have is a machine given by Krishna for fulfilling our desires.
Yeah,
It's a machine. It doesn't belong to us.
yantra.
It's specific for us for whatever insane desires we had when we came here. He gave it to us, and he's going to take it away from us whenever we're done with it. So, I mean, what power do we really have? We just have to go through this. However,
We have the power, we have one power. We have one power, the power of faith, which is very large, very large.
Mm,
And it takes work. It really takes work. We have to work on it because Maya's just ready to grab you and keep you here.
right. We're putting
And-
faith in so many other things. We really are not interested in Krishna. We want something else. And that's why we're here.
Ridiculous. I mean,
This
but
concept.
we started. Go on,
What
Patsy.
were we thinking?
Patsy?
The concept of faith, sometimes that's almost like in a sentimental package.
Mm.
Faith is based on knowledge.
Ah,
If you understand how something works, if you know the steps on the ladder are secure, then you can climb it. Otherwise, somebody might say, oh, just have faith, climb, but you look at it and you see it's rickety. No, I'm not going to try that. That doesn't look like a good place to go. So Kapila Dev is explaining to Devahuti that knowledge is the ultimate. Didn't he say something like that in the very beginning? Let's see what slide.
Yes,
Now. We're on
Yeah.
11.
it's true. Knowledge, it's verse
Knowledge
2.
is the ultimate perfection of self-realization. I shall explain that knowledge unto you by which the knots of attachment to the material world are cut. So he's systematically working his way through this. And in this particular verse, it's really interesting because part of it appears that we don't have any free will, because Prabhupada says here, in other words, a conditioned soul has no free choice. He has to accept a certain type of body according to his karma. Here he's saying that there's no free choice. But yet down here he says, thus he has free choice to accept a spiritual or material body. But once the body is accepted, he has to enjoy or suffer the consequences. So it's like buying a ticket. Once you buy a ticket on the
Right.
airplane, you bought it. You wanted to go to a certain destination. You went and worked hard, got your funds to purchase the ticket. You got the ticket. Now you're on the plane. You're forced. There's nothing you can do. You're going to that destination. You can't just change your mind in the middle of the flight and say, hey, look, I want to go to another place. You have to go through the resultant reaction until you land. Then you can go somewhere else. So the living entity, we're here, and we're in this body. This is what we've worked for, and received due to our past actions. Tatenu kampam shukshing mikshamana says that now, what are those three things, Samapriya?
The first one is to patiently accept the Lord's
No.
mercy. Oh,
No,
No.
to enthusiastically await for the Lord's mercy.
yeah, enthusiastically wait for the Lord's mercy all the time.
Patiently
suffering.
awaiting.
Oh, patiently wait. I'm a little confused.
Yeah.
It's COVID. I got the eternal excuse now.
Patiently await, patiently undergo the sufferings or enjoyments of our past, which is like being on the plane, all the while offering obeisances to the Lord rather than becoming angry and blaming him. It's a beautiful blend, how to deal with this world.
You know, another thing in regard to that is that once you really want to surrender to the plan of the Lord, even though you might be in a horrible situation in the material world, you still can actually become detached from it. That's the hope. That's the real hope, that we could, even though we're suffering due to our past misdeeds, but we're developing our sound faith in Krishna and his words and the spiritual master, then that gives us a strength to put less importance on what we're going through this time around. We have been around so many times. We have so many members, families, this, that. I was thinking of my aunt, 100 years. Now that's almost obscene to live that long in this world. 100 years. That's a lot of attachment. It's a lot of attachment. Hare Krishna. Okay, let's go on. How about Faye, my darling? Faye, would you like to read for us, sweetie?
Welcome back, Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Srimad Bhagavatam 3.26.9. Devahuti said, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, kindly explain the characteristics of the Supreme Person and his energies. For both of these are the causes of this manifest and unmanifest creation. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Prakriti, or material nature, is connected with both the Supreme Lord and the living entities, just as a woman is connected with her husband as a wife and with her children as a mother. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that he impregnates Mother Nature with children, living entities, and therefore all species of living entities become manifest. The relationship of all living entities with material nature has been explained. Now an understanding of the relationship between material nature and the Supreme Lord is sought by Devahuti.
Faye, go read those two sentences. Read that again, the relationship. Read that sentence again, because it's actually the crux of what's going on in this change that she's speaking.
Sorry, excuse me. The relationship of all living entities with material nature has been explained. Now an understanding of the relationship between material nature and the Supreme Lord is sought by Devahuti. May I go ahead?
Yes.
In the Vedic literatures, it is said that by the glance of the Supreme Lord, the total material energy is impregnated, and then everything is born of material nature. It is also confirmed in the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita that under his glance, Adi Hakshana, under his direction and by his will, nature is working. It is not that nature works blindly. After understanding the position of the conditioned souls in relation to material nature, Devahuti wanted to know how nature works under the direction of the Lord, and what the relationship is between the material nature and the Lord. In other words, she wanted to learn the characteristics of the Supreme Lord in relation to material nature. Devahuti is not unintelligent. She has enough intelligence to understand that the living entities are not on the level of the Supreme Lord. Because the living entities are infinitesimal, they become bewildered or conditioned by material nature. But this does not mean that the Supreme Lord is also conditioned or bewildered. The difference between the conditioned soul and the Lord is that the Lord is the Lord, the master of material nature, and he is therefore not subject to its control.
Wow. Okay, do you have something to, this is like Prabhupada again and again and again. He's showing the difference between the soul and the Lord. You see how that is?
I think that it's important for us as we're listening to always keep in mind that the transcendental nature of the Lord is above all material things. He's uncontaminated. He's never contaminated. He is untouched. He is never touched. Whereas our little limited vision and our conditioned state, we want to act like the impersonalists and say that Krishna, oh, he's touched, he's contaminated, he's born. No, he's not. Everything about the Lord is perfect, it's transcendental, it's unsullied. Therefore, if we look at Devahuti's question, as teacher Dhruva Maharaj was pointing out, that he had me reread that one little sentence again, if you want to put the screen back. Devahuti's question, she's really getting to the show me of, I'm from Missouri part. She's saying, okay, how can this material energy be created by the Lord? We're in it, we're contaminated by it, but the Lord's never impacted. Show me how material energy is working, Lord. How do I get out of this? How can I be like you? How can I change? The basis of loving the Lord comes initially from understanding him. So it's wonderful that she's asking what she did. It's a very nice question.
Very
We have
nice
to know
question.
where we are in order to love Krishna more.
Right, good, very good, Faye. You want to just finish these last two?
No, actually, Sama, we have more people that want to read, so.
Okay, so then, Kate, would you like to read this, Kate? Thank you, Faye, that was beautiful.
Two words used in this verse are sat and asat. The cosmic manifestation is asat. It does not exist, but the material energy of the Supreme Lord is sat, or ever existing. Material nature is ever existing in subtle form as the energy of the Lord, but it sometimes manifests this non-existent or temporarily existent nature, the cosmos. An analogy may be made with the father and mother. The mother and father exist, but sometimes the mother begets children. Similarly, this cosmic manifestation, which comes from the unmanifest nature, material nature of the Supreme Lord, sometimes appears again and again disappears. But the material nature is ever existing, and the Lord is the supreme cause for both the subtle and gross manifestations of this material world.
Okay, thank you. Do you understand that? How more of the purport is being explained here, that there's a difference between the Lord and the living entity. You have something to say about that, Kate?
It just a little bit becomes, I kind of need a little bit more, I need to digest that a little bit because it just
Okay, good.
is a little bit confusing, just the semantics of it. But I'm sure you can enlighten me.
Well,
and
Pat, do you want to
simplify it
explain that further?
Sure. What it's saying is that material energy is eternal, but it manifests sometimes and is unmanifest sometimes. And then he gave the example of the father and the mother. The mother exists. Sometimes she gives birth to children. Sometimes she doesn't, but she continues to exist. So the potential, he's heading into what's going to be called the Pradhan and Prakriti concepts. In its unmanifest nature, in its unmanifest state, material nature is called Pradhan, but it still has the potential to become the cosmos. When the Lord glances over that unmanifest nature, then it becomes germinated and starts to manifest time, false ego, senses, elements, universes, all those different things. We were reading about this prior to Lord Kapiladev in Maitreya's descriptions to Vidura. Then when it manifests, the reason it says here that it doesn't exist is because it doesn't exist eternally as a manifestation. So it always exists, therefore Sat and Asat. When it's manifest, then it's there. When it's not manifest, it's not there. Therefore, it's always Asat because it will never be eternal. The Lord, however, is Sat. The Supreme Lord is Sat. He always exists. His abode always exists. His associates in the spiritual world always exist. They don't come and go. And thus there's a difference between the material world and the spiritual world. Does that clarify it a bit? Kate?
Kate?
Yeah, it's definitely
It's a meditation.
Meditation. That's one way to put it.
We have the tendency to think that everything we're going through exists eternally. Why? Because we are eternal, but we're putting our vision on the wrong thing. It's actually quite relieving to know that this is not eternal, this material world. But it's relieving, but it's also painful. Like your son, that's not really your son. You have to be attached and take care of him now. But, we have these, we want to love and we want to have these rasas and relationships. But until we put it on Krishna directly, everything is out of order. Everything is out of order. And sometimes it takes a powering tragedy or a wake-up call. I have just been awakened. I'll probably go back to sleep pretty soon. But now that I'm still awake, I'm trying to see everything in the right perspective. It's actually mercy. It's actually mercy. All right. Thank you, sweetie. Nandaji, could you read for us a couple of slides? I got it covered, Pati. I see who's going to read. Nanda, could you read?
Coming, I'm unmuting. Okay.
Thank you.
326:10, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, the unmanifested eternal combination of the three modes is the cause of the manifest state. Oh God. And it's called Pradhan. It's called Prakriti when in the manifested stage of existence. I'm going to read it again. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, the unmanifested eternal combination of the three modes is the cause of the manifested state and is called Pradhan. It is called Prakriti when in the manifested stage of existence. Purport. The Lord points out material nature in its subtle stage, which is called Pradhan, and he analyzes this Pradhan. The explanation of Pradhan and Prakriti is that Pradhan is the subtle, undifferentiated sum total of all material elements. I think everybody's not muted because there's background noise. I think
Okay,
Putney, Gopa Putney, you're not muted. Okay, sorry. Okay.
okay, so wait a second, let her get muted. Go, G. Thank you, sweetie. Okay, go on, Nanda.
Okay, although they are undifferentiated, one can understand that the total material elements are contained therein. Sheesh. When the total material elements are manifested by the interaction of the three modes of material nature, the manifestation is called Prakriti. Phew.
Okay, now let's just explain that real briefly to us.
Well, that was just what Dhruva Maharaj Prabhu was pointing out. He said this slide is talking about, so the unmanifested soup. Well, when all the ingredients are there, but they're in an unmanifested state, it's called pradhan. And then, yes, pradhan. And then Prakriti is when all the elements are, thank you, I need that help. When the total material elements are manifested by the interaction of the three modes of material nature. Isn't that when, okay, this is a question. Isn't that when the time factor starts and then is that what it is, or not just the time factor?
Yes, excellent. That's the first thing that happens when the Lord glances over the unmanifested soup, we'll call it, pradhan. Then the first thing that manifests is time element, because what happens is at that point where there's a glance, the living entities are actually that glance with their desires and their past karmas and their subtle bodies are what are infused and impregnated back into material nature. Then all that has to gradually unfold and blossom into the material cosmos. So at that time, time starts, yes.
Thank you.
Premananda, thank you, Nandaji.
Yeah, Premananda had a good grasp on this too. If you want to explain a little bit from
hand up.
No, I'm just kind of confused about Mahatattva. Isn't when the Lord glances on the Pradhan and then it manifests as Mahatattva? But here it says it's manifest as Prakriti. So that's the part I'm confused about.
Well, what is the Mahatattva?
I thought the Mahatattva is the manifested state of the material elements.
Yeah,
right.
That's my understanding.
In that sense, Prakriti and Mahatattva are synonyms.
Right.
Oh, they're synonyms? Okay.
Yeah. In that context, where it's a manifest state. Mahatattva and Prakriti is the manifest state.
Yeah. It's the same, it's the same condition, right? It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Nanda, could you read the next slide and then Arundhati after her? We're almost done here.
Sure. 26, chapter 26, text 11. The aggregate elements, namely the 5 gross elements, the 5 subtle elements, the 4 internal senses, the 5 senses for gathering knowledge, and the 5 outward organs of action are known as the pradhan. Purport. According to Bhagavad Gita, the sum total of the 24 elements described herein is called the Yonir Mahat Brahma. The sum total of the living entities is impregnated into this Yonir Mahat Brahma, and they are born in different forms, beginning from Brahma down to the insignificant ant. In the Srimad Bhagavatam and other Vedic literatures, the sum total of the 24 elements, pradhan, is also described as Yonir Mahat Brahma. It is the source of birth and the subsistence of all living entities.
Can you read this too, Nanda?
Yeah, so the picture talks, the total material substance called Brahman is the source of birth. Yeah, okay, that's the Gita. Okay, yeah. Okay, again, the total material substance is called Brahman. It is the source of birth, and it is that Brahman that I impregnate, making possible the birth of all living entities, O son of Bharat. That's from 14:3 purport. Gita.
So if all of this is the unmanifest form of the material energy, pradhan, all of those elements are in a subtle form, isn't it?
Yes.
They're all in a subtle form.
Let's draw an analogy. Say I'm an architect and I want to design a building. When I do that in my mind, I can actually conceive of the building, the windows, the doors, the floors, the electricity. I can see it in my mind. It's an unmanifest building. It doesn't exist, but yet it's there in an unmanifest state. It's a little bit, it's an analogy because we're using material examples to understand something that's even finer than mind, intelligence, and ego. But it gives us the realization, it gives us the direction to think that it's unmanifest. Then when I get a piece of paper and do a blueprint, then it starts to manifest, at least on paper. This will be described by Lord Kapila in upcoming chapters, the fundamentals of material nature, how all this will unfold and become manifest. Then I hire a contractor and actually buy the concrete, buy the wood, buy the wires, buy the pipes, and go out and the workers put it all together and they manifest it. So it's from an unmanifest, subtle form, and then it becomes manifest in its gross manifestation. Then it's called Prakriti, or the Mahatattva.
And this is Shankya philosophy.
Right. Yes,
It's
good.
It's far out. All right, let's thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nanda. and
Oh, this
Pati,
isn't
and-
part of the
oh,
text, but I included it because Srila Prabhupada, we're seeing now, I've used the last several slides, had Bhagavad Gita verses like that, the bewildered spirit soul with the puppeteer, that one, this one with Krishna saying he impregnates the Brahman. This is the purport to that verse in
okay.
Bhagavad Gita.
Wow. See, yeah. Arundhati Ji, are you with us? Arundhati?
Yes, Mother.
Hello, my
Welcome back.
darling.
Happy to see you.
Happy to see you too. Why don't you read this for us?
Bhagavad Gita 14.3 purport. The Mahat Tattva is the total cause of the total cosmic manifestation, and because in the total substance of the material cause there are three modes of nature, it is sometimes called Brahman. The Supreme Personality impregnates that total substance, and thus innumerable universes become possible. This total material substance, the Mahat Tattva, is described as Brahman in the Vedic literature. Tasmad etad Brahma nama rupam annam cha jayate. Into that Brahman, the seeds of the living entities are impregnated by the Supreme Person. The 24 elements, beginning from earth, water, fire, and air, are all material energy called Mahabrahman, or the great Brahman, the material nature. As is explained in the 7th chapter, beyond this there is another superior nature, the living entity. In material nature, the superior nature is mixed by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and thereafter all living entities are born of this material nature. The scorpion lays its eggs in piles of rice, and sometimes it is said that the scorpion is born out of rice, but the rice is not the cause of the scorpion. Actually, the eggs were laid by the mother. Similarly, material nature is not the cause of the birth of the living entities. The seed is given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they only seem to come out as products of material nature. Thus, every living entity, according to his past activities, has a different body created by this material nature, and the entity can enjoy or suffer according to his past deeds.
Unmute some.
The last paragraph kind of sums up that whole topic. What do you think, Arundhati? Can you see that, sweetie? How that sums
Yeah.
it up.
This is such a nice visual picture where it says this, the scorpion lays its eggs, and we think the scorpion is coming out of the piles of rice, because when you have scientists versus religions talking about the whole thing, they assume that the living entity comes out of this material energy. Either it's the Great Bang or any other evolution philosophy that they have. But in reality, it's explained so beautifully over here that we always existed, and then when Krishna impregnates the pradhanas, we all come together, and we are actually parts and parcels of him and not products of the material energy.
Very good.
that's
And that's our desire, is to
perfect.
get back to the spiritual energy, so you don't have to deal with this Thank you, sweetie. Nanda Ji, would you like to say, I see your hand is raised. And then
Yeah.
after Nanda speaks, Sham Govind, if you want to read this slide. The next
Okay.
one.
Just another thing to add to the meditation of how profoundly implicated we are in this material world. So we can say, oh yeah, I've had a few births. Yeah. Oh, I've been in the I've been in the material world a few breaths of Brahma. Oh yeah. I've been in the material world a few lifetimes of Brahma. But actually, according to that purport that we were just reading, we've been in the material universes for different manifestations of the Pradhan, you know, unmanifested state and manifested state. And still those same desires are carried over from the last creation when we did the 10 million things. Oh gosh, I just want to add that. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
I get impatient with, you
Yeah,
know,
all right. Well, after being here for so many different Pradhans, you would get impatient. Hare Krishna. All right, I make a pact. We're all getting out of here. This is it. We're not going through this again. All right. Sham, would you like to read this slide? And then, Patu, you're going to have to explain the last slide.
Srimad Bhagavatam 3:26, text 12 to 15. There are 5 gross elements, namely earth, water, fire, air, and ether. There are also 5 subtle elements: smell, taste, color, touch, and sound. The senses for acquiring knowledge and the organs for action number 10, namely the auditory sense, the sense of taste, the tactile sense, the sense of sight, the sense of smell, and the active organs for speaking, working, traveling, generating, and evacuating. The internal subtle senses are experienced as having 4 aspects: in the shape of mind, intelligence, ego, and contaminated consciousness. Distinctions between them can be made only by different functions, since they represent different characteristics. All these are considered the qualified Brahman, the mixing element, which is known as time, is counted as the 25th element. Purport. The 4 internal senses or subtle senses described herein are defined by different characteristics. When pure consciousness is polluted by material contamination, and when identification with the body becomes prominent, one is said to be situated under false ego. Consciousness is the function of the soul, and therefore behind consciousness there is soul. Consciousness polluted by material contamination is called ahankara. According to the Vedic version, there is no existence beyond Brahman. Sarvam ke vidam Brahma. Chandogya Upanishad 3:14-1.
Oh my goodness. So we're pretty much encased in this, all of these elements. What can you tell me about this to sum this up? This is one of the last verses. Sham.
Well, it seems like it's like a whole network that's like fully absorbing us. And so if we act not thinking of Krishna, then we can become easily more entangled. But if we have knowledge, just as this section began, we can actually cut ourselves out of the web with knowledge. So to summarize it, that's what I could say.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about our bodies, the veins. There's so much going on in this body, and we are immersed in it, you know. And then now it's being analyzed in these verses, the names and the features and sound and taste and odor and you know, Krishna has it down how we can get really entangled here, but we can really get out of being entangled as well. Chaita, thank you, Sham. Chaita.
Thank you, Sham. I appreciate the word network. It's a big web, and we are functioning in it, and we're trying to make sense of it, and it's consuming us. So network is a really nice concept. And reading this verse 15, it's to me that's astonishing that time is considered it's the 25th element. It's so unique, and it has its own special power to mix all of them together. And without
Yeah.
time, the whole network doesn't function.
Amazing, huh? Very good.
Haribol.
Okay, so this is what we're gonna go to the next slide. Patti, can you, this is the last additional slide, and my husband will explain.
Well, this is just a nice image, or kind of like a encapsulation of what we just read. Again, Kapila Dev's Sankhya Yoga is the study of the difference between matter and spirit, and the proper action of the living entity, which is devotional service. So this kind of just shows what those 25 elements are. 5 subtle elements, which are sound, touch, form, color, and taste. The 5 gross elements, which are ether, air, fire, water, and earth. 5 knowledge acquiring senses, ears, skin, eyes, tongue, and nose. The working senses, the mouth, the tongue, hands, legs, genitals, and anus. And 4 internal senses, mind, intelligence, ego, and contaminated consciousness. So in a sense, it's saying this is all. The whole material world is made up of these 25 elements, because as we read, time is the mixing element. And this, and in his next verses and explanations, right now, we're just entering into the fundamentals of material nature. And basically today, if you remember, what we read about was that he described the Supreme Lord as transcendental to this material world, but consciousness everywhere. Then as his pastime, he enters into this material manifestation. And how that's done is by glancing over the material nature and impregnating it with the living entities who have desires from their past experiences. And then he'll describe in future lessons how the whole thing unfolds into these different categories of the 25 elements. And he says, by understanding that, an intelligent person in the human form of life should understand, I'm not this body, that these things are not here for my enjoyment. They're meant for Krishna's service. And therefore, our desires change by following the process of performing Vaidhi sadhana bhakti.
Oh, boy. Okay, we have 2 questions here. Premananda and then Faye.
Prabhu, I have a question regarding the 25 elements. So I think in different sections of Srimad Bhagavatam, the 24th and 25th element varies. I think in Canto 2 we studied that the 24th element is Mahatattva, and then I don't remember what the 25 is. In Canto 11 it says there is nature and there is Lord. They are the 24th and 25th, and here it's saying that it's time. That's the 25th element. And in some places it says so the soul is the 24th element and the super soul is the 25th. So there is always some kind of variation in the 24th and 25th. Or do they all mean the same thing? That's kind of
whenever you talk about categories and numbers, practically speaking, as long as all of them are included, you can mix and adjust them in various ways. Just like there's 3 modes of material nature, there's 3 modes of material nature. How does Prabhupada say that 3 times 3 equals 9? 9 times 9 equals 81, and thus there are 8,400,000 species of life. It's like you can take categories and numbers and adjust them in different ways, but basically it's all the same thing. This is just Lord Kapila Dev's particular method in this section. Like you're saying, other sages and other descriptions may vary it slightly, but it's not really different.
No,
it's just a different way of saying it.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Is that okay? Okay, Faye, did you want to say something? And then Nanda.
Thank you, Mataji. Prabhu, Dhruva Maharaj, if you can go back to the little screen that you just had up there, that last one. If one thing that helps me when I looked at this chart over the different studies we've done, we've looked at similar charts. If you go on line 1, the 5 subtle elements, you see the word sound. And then if you go directly underneath of it, the 5 gross elements, well, sound, ether, then go down to line 3, ears.
Good, very good.
You can see how these components are not only interacting, but why Srila Prabhupada always tells us about our ears being so important and hearing, why that is so important for us to connect with Krishna, to hear the scriptures read, to hear the chantings and so forth. So that very subtle touch of Krishna, if you want to call it, coming from the ether sound, that's how we get it into our ears. It makes it to our heart. It's sort of sweet. If you could grid these 5 things and put them into vertical blocks, you can see how they all tangibly interrelate very logically. So it's how you can take 24 things and make 25 out of them. And the last thing for the tattva, the prakriti, the unmanifested things, if I think of this simple analogy, I go to the grocery store, but before I go to the grocery store, I have a recipe and I have a shopping list, and I get all the vegetables. I come home, I chop up the vegetables after I've nicely washed them. I put the pot of water on the stove to make the soup. I add the vegetables. I turn on the heat. And then I see the heat as time. And I kind of visualize the big spoon stirring up all the ingredients there, getting them to react as sort of being the modes of nature. Here comes the mode of passion and goodness and ignorance. You've got to put all that stuff together to get that soup to its form that we can see and understand. So sometimes I have to take things that are very complicated and make them very simple in order for my brain to get it. But if you make a grid of what Dhruva Maharaj just showed us, you can see how these things all work together very nicely. Thank you, Prabhu, for
I
your
think in one of our previous studies in the second canto, Premananda made a nice chart. I'll take that and I'll put it up online so you can see that one also. That's a little bit different. Thank you, Faye. Wonderful.
Nandaji, you want to end for us? Nanda.
Sorry, I'm talking without being unmuted. Sorry. So just a comment regarding Premananda Prabhu's question about the 24, 25, or 26 elements, or, whatever the different numbers. And Dhruva gave a perfect answer. But that same question is asked by Uddhava to Krishna in the Gita, and the Uddhava Gita in the 11th canto. He says, can you explain why some people explain that there's different numbers and who's right? He said, and Uddhava says, I want to know which one's right. And Krishna says, they're all right. Just like what Dhruva Prabhu said, they're all right because they analyze it in different ways, but I consider them all right. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Okay.
Jai, any other questions or comments for today? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please accept my obeisances.
Vantakalpatubhyascha, Kripa Sindhubhyacha, Patitanam
Good week, everybody. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Jai.